plowing with the oxen, and he takes his cloak and throws it onto the younger man. The young man knew exactly what the implications were. And he ran after Elijah and wanted to know if he could just go back and talk to his parents a while before he left. And Elisha just told him to go and do what he felt he needed to do. And he said, "You can then follow me." Elisha goes back, offers a sacrifice with the oxen, and the next scene is Elisha following Elijah wherever he went. From Gilgal to Jericho to Jordan and Bethel, all of these places where there were divine visitations to remind him of all of the implications of those encounters. He saw the power of God, he witnessed the presence of God, he saw the sovereignty of God, all of these truths that Elijah was passing on to him in these geographical locations. And finally, when he said, "I want a double portion of your spirit," Elijah said, "You have asked a hard thing, but if you will see me when I'm lifted up, God will honor that." And if you track the lives of these two men, you will see numerically and functionally, Elisha in many, many ways eclipsed that of this thundering prophet we know as Elijah, who'd stood before the prophets of Baal, who'd stood before Ahab and Jezebel. And now as his time had come to go on, the next time you see Elijah, really after he's lifted up by the chariot that God sends for him, is when he sets his foot in the promised land on the Mount of Transfiguration, when he comes with Moses, and Peter is just overwhelmed by the presence of the two people for whom God himself was the undertaker. Moses and Elijah, who were just lifted up into the heavens. But what happens here is a remarkable story in 2 Kings chapter 6. I'll just read it for you. What's happening is that the band of attackers are coming from Aram constantly. The Arameans were the enemies that were doing away. We heard that in the Amalekites yesterday, and the Arameans were amongst those also who gave the Israelites a hard time. And the king of Aram is puzzled that every time he makes a plan, the king of Israel seems to know it. And so he's looking at his confidants and he says, "Who of you is a betrayer? Which of you is going around and telling them all that's going to happen?" They say, "It's not any one of us, king. The fact of the matter is he's got a man by the name of Elisha, the servant of the Lord, and he seems to know in secret whatever you plan in secret for yourself." And the king rather foolishly says, "We're going to get him. Let's make a secret plan and go and get Elisha." Now, this is the very man who knows all that's planned secretly. So here's what happens in verse 27. When he finishes saying, "None of us, my Lord," and then in verse 13 it says, after verse 12 of 2 Kings 6, "Go and find out where he is," the king ordered, "and so I can capture him." Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early in the morning, this is Elisha's right-hand man, and went out early in the morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh, my Lord," he said, "what shall we do?" The servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. It was my privilege a couple of years ago when speaking at the prayer breakfast for the House of Lords to be at the same table with David Putnam, who actually produced the great film Chariots of Fire, and he is a member of the House of Lords. And when they introduced me as David Putnam, and I said, "Are you the one who really did Chariots of Fire?" He said, "Oh, you've heard about it, have you?" And very humbly tried to dodge it. But it's a remarkable story of how he had studied the life of Eric Liddell, who sort of envisioned this strength from above over against, as he was running against his competitor all the time, competing against him, and ultimately when he won the event that he was not used to running because he was not wanting to run even the heat on the Lord's Day. And Eric Liddell went on to become a missionary in China, seeing always those chariots of fire that were around him. We discussed that film a bit, and I told him what it meant to me. I want to talk to you tonight on that theme. Let me begin by reading for you a British theologian's comment on why people turn away from the church. I won't name him, and I have reasons for that, but let me read what he says. "Tell me, What is your image of Christianity? Is it old ladies in hats, perhaps? A Sunday school of 6-year-olds singing I am Happy? A couple of nervous, pimply students offering you an invitation to a coffee party at the College Christian Union? Is that what puts you off Christianity? That it is all too wet and effeminate? Or is it the showy professionalism of mass evangelism that antagonizes you? That gleaming transatlantic smile that beams down at you from the video relay? The oily sincerity of the soloist as she croons her gospel entertainment? The unscrupulous emotionalism of the appeal, fanned by the humming choirs and tear-stained faces? Is that what turns you off Christianity? Maybe it's the mass evangelistic spectacular with its glossy advertising and its razzmatazz. Perhaps it is the respectable image of the church that you dislike. Those rows of new cars parked outside each Sunday. Those terribly nice people in their frightfully chic outfits you meet inside. The vicar who talks as if he's got a plum in his mouth. And those delicate cucumber sandwiches his wife offers you at a tea party. Is it all too conventional, too middle class for you maybe? You know, there's plenty of so-called Christianity in this world that is pathetically fashionable, superficially showy, and boringly trite. It turns my stomach as well as it turns yours. And I don't mind it the least if you tell me how much it turns yours. But the existence of 1,000 fakes does not mean there is no such thing as a genuine diamond. And the Christianity I'm writing to you about, says he, is what Jesus talks about in the Bible, and that's what interests me. Listen to the description. Pathetically fashionable, superficially showy, and boringly trite. That's the way Christianity is often viewed by the skeptic. Listening to that professor, you really believe that Jesus turned water into wine and so on? How ridiculous can all of this be, that you actually subscribe to that kind of a worldview? You know, we here in America are about to move into a time of elections. And it's a critical time as we decide what the future needs to look like. And the country seems almost divided right down the middle. Barely a hair's whisker, it seems. We won't know until Tuesday night, if we know even then. But what really is tearing this country apart at its core are philosophical and ideological issues that at their core are morally decided. Can you really live beyond your means? Can you desacralize life, sexuality, the home? Can all of these things really be treated on purely naturalistic terms, and then we move forward on the wings of some psychedelic fancy or some imaginary goal that we want to pursue? Because after all, we're a great nation. That's what we seem to keep reminding ourselves. We can do it anyway. When you go back to the book of Kings, you see this constant encounter between the religiously minded, prophetically minded, God's revelation-minded individual who stands over against the leader and the people with the reminder that there is a perspective and a counter-perspective, a calling and a counter-call, that ultimately the kingdom of God must reign supreme in your life individually, in our lives as family members, in the community and the nation at large. And so when Elijah goes off the scene, you begin to see how important it is that he has a successor. Because Elijah had encountered Jezebel and Ahab. And when Ahab died and Elijah is about to leave, the first book of Kings ends and the second book of Kings begins. And that second book of Kings begins with the farewell to Elijah. And now comes all of a sudden Elisha, and he's going to be dealing with the successor of Ahab. And I want to take for you the motifs that are addressed to mention at least a couple of things here. Number one, God is intimately involved in nations. He's intimately involved in individual decision-making, and he cares how the people of God respond to the issues of their time. It is thoroughly pervasive, intentionally penetrating, and with a message and a call to a higher order.
The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And this has provided a remarkable opportunity for the gospel of Jesus Christ. RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind, and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy, and the New Zacharias Institute, we want to be able to take the questions that often serve as barriers to belief and instead use these as opportunities to share the gospel. By clearing those barriers, we can equip people to then engage with their friends, family, colleagues, and institutions. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
So I want to look at 5 different places in which the message speaks so clearly. First, I want to speak to you on the place of history. And ironically, in the film Chariots of Fire, this very chapter is quoted. After I wrote those verses down, I remembered when I saw the movie, reading from Isaiah chapter 40. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and his people are like grasshoppers. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground, than he blows them away and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Listen to that last verse again. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. Why do you say that? Because sometimes our strength is going. You're not going to be able to make it if it's not renewed in some way. They will soar on wings like eagles. Why is it important for us to do that? Because sometimes we can get so bound into a narrower vision, we don't see the total picture and the higher view of what God is doing across the world and what God is doing across history. They will run and not grow weary. It's easy to get tired when you're running and give it up and say, I'm not going to continue anymore. They will walk and not be faint. Your daily direction, step by step, it's easy for you to sometimes say, is this all really worth it? And what I find is that stunning next verse that begins in Isaiah 41. It says in these words, be silent before me, you islands. Be silent before me. So I want to talk to you about what God tells us about history. It is remarkable that we understand it. Of all the definitions of histories that I've read, one of them stands out the most, and it is this: history is nothing more than a compilation of innumerable biographies. History is nothing more than a compilation of innumerable biographies. It's individual lives writ large, how it makes a change for better or for evil. Martin Luther talked about history, and he said it's like a drunken man reeling from one wall to the other, knocking itself senseless by every hit. Like a drunken man reeling from one wall to the other, knocking itself senseless with every hit. When will we ever learn that we can't live profane lifestyles in a nation? When will we ever learn that our leaders need to know how to honor God and not think that they're supermen or superwomen and can do it all in their own strength? I see three implications of understanding the nature of history. The first is this: when the sacred trust of God is abandoned, the web of evil gets more complex. When the sacred trust of God is abandoned, the web of evil gets more complex. It doesn't get simpler. It only gets more entangling and more puzzling and more convoluted to find your way out of this mess. The web of evil, with our own corrupt hearts and our inability to even change these lives. You walk away from there. There was a 6'6" guy with us who was a chaplain to the University of Virginia basketball and football teams, a good friend of Peter, giant of a man. And he phoned Peter the next day, and Peter said he just sobbed and sobbed on the phone, recollecting the emotions of the previous day. Ladies and gentlemen, the web of evil just gets deeper and deeper and deeper in history, and sometimes it can be in the highest offices and most corrupt settings, and the world desperately needs historical leaders whose lives can get us out of this web of evil. But before looking into that web of evil, I want you to back up for just a moment and ask yourself where the church is in all of this. How do we address these issues? It was the poet Bacon who said there are three stages, Byron, in the declination of religion. Listen very carefully, please. Three stages in the declinations of religion, how religion declines. I want you to hear carefully. This is what Byron said. The first is heresy, when true God is worshipped with false worship. When the true God is worshipped with false worship. I ask you to look around the landscape of the church today and ask yourself how much heresy really dominates worship today. Number two, it's idolatry, where false gods are worshipped while we suppose them to be true. Think of all that happened in the New Age movement that came about, from heresy to idolatry. And the third he calls witchcraft, when we adore false gods, knowing them to be wicked, we still worship those false gods. From heresy to idolatry to witchcraft. This is actually Romans 1. Professing ourselves to be wise, we become fools. Think of the celebratory way in which we now see evil getting more and more heinous. But then there is a second stance. Not only do we see history and how evil gets more complex, but how every generation needs to be won each time over. This is so critical for us to understand in our ministry, how every generation needs to be won on its own terms. You know, I was raised in a very comfortable home, and all was well by Indian standards and so on. But my parents had absolutely no clue what was going on inside my heart. None. They had no idea how desperately I was moving towards self-destruction. Not really their fault, but probably they just made the assumption they were okay, they came through all right. Why can't my children just be all right as well? One of the saddest books I have ever read is a book called Father and Son, written by Edmund Goss. These were two brilliant people. The father was a marine biologist, Edmund Goss, and the son, a brilliant guy who ended up as the curator of the library at the House of Lords. He was a professor at Trinity College, Cambridge, was knighted before he passed away, and at the age of 58, he wrote a book about his father's faith and how he walked away from it. On the last 2 pages, you read this. His father writing to him, "Son, when you came to us in the summer, the heavy flow fell upon me. I discovered how very far you had departed from God. It was not that you had yielded to the strong tide of youthful blood and had fallen a victim to fleshly lusts. In that case, however sad, your enlightened conscience would have spoken loudly, and you would have found your way back to the blood which cleanseth us from all sin, to humble confession and self-abasement, to forgiveness, to recommunion with God. It was not this, it was worse. It was horrid, it was insidious infidelity, which had already worked in your mind and heart with terrible energy. Far worse, because this was sapping the very foundations of your faith and all true godliness. But you know, son, nothing seemed left to which I could appeal to you anymore. I found no common ground with you. The Holy Scriptures no longer had any authority, and you had taught yourself to evade their inspiration. Any particular oracle of God which pressed you, you could easily explain away. And he goes on and on. He said, please don't think I'm speaking to you in passion and using unanswerable strength of words. But if the written word of God is not absolutely authoritative, what do we know of God? What more can we infer from Plato and Socrates and Cicero and all of that? And he goes to this. This dreadful conduct of yours I had intended after much prayer to pass by in entire silence. But your insincere inquiries after the cause of my sorrow have led me to go to the root of the matter, and I could not stop short of the development contained in this letter. Son, it is with pain and not with anger that I send it to you, hoping that you may be induced to review the whole course of your life, and that this is only a stage. If grace were ever granted to you in this, how joyfully should I bury all the past, and again have this sweet fellowship with my son, my beloved son, as of old. This is the son's closing paragraph after that letter in the book. The reader who has done me the favor to follow this record of the clash of two temperaments will not fail to perceive the crowning importance of this letter, from which I have just made a long quotation. It sums up for me the closer logic of the whole history of the situation, and I may leave it to form the epigraph for this little book. All that I need further to say is to point out that when such defiance is offered to the intelligence of a thoughtful and honest young man like myself, with the normal impulses of my 21 years, there are only two alternatives. Either I must cease to think for myself or my individualism, or I must be instantly confirmed, and the necessity of religious independence must be emphasized. No compromise is seen. No compromise was offered. No proposal of a truce would have been acceptable. It was a case of everything and nothing. And thus, desperately challenged, I threw away my conscience once and for all, and the yoke of this dedication, and as respectfully as I could, without parade or remonstrance, I took upon myself a human being's privilege to fashion my inner life for myself. Pretty heavy stuff. Pretty heavy stuff. You cannot bank on the previous generation's accomplishments. I say to you, and as you look at history, you begin to see when sacred trust is abandoned, evil gets more complex, and how every generation must be won on its own terms. And lastly, when the days grow dark in history, we either go to cynicism or to paralysis. And if we move in that direction, we leave our country abandoned, or we move to hope and the truths of the gospel and become lights in a dark world. I want to challenge you. I don't know what will happen for our nation over the next week, but whatever happens, you and I are called to be lights. God is sovereign over history, and whatever happens, let us win this generation and put them into the places where they can reach their own. And let us know for a certainty that as they reach their own, we must find the involvement and the engagement. Let us not become cynical and apathetic and leave the whims of others who take the people astray to another calling and let them lead the whole nation in wrong directions. We can't do that. We must be involved. The place of history. Secondly, it's the place of the leader. In the place of history, you see fluctuation. In the place of the leader, you see politicization. A young boy was asked to define politics, and he said, well, I don't know, but in a word study, poly means many, and ties mean, ticks means a blood-sucking parasite. So if you've got politics, you must have many blood-sucking parasites who are in it. That's the kind of cynical attitude we actually have. The story is told of a father who saw his little boy starting to walk and said, you know, I've been told that when you start walking, if you want to know what your son is going to become or daughter is going to become, put a bottle of whiskey on the table and put a Bible and put some money on the table and see in wrong directions. We can't do that. We must be involved. The place of history. Secondly, it's the place of the leader. In the place of history, you see fluctuation. In the place of the leader, you see politicization. A young boy was asked to define politics, and he said, well, I don't know, but in a word study, poly means many, and ties mean, ticks means a blood-sucking parasite. So if you've got politics, you must have many blood-sucking parasites who are in it. That's the kind of cynical attitude we actually have. The story is told of a father who saw his little boy starting to walk and said, you know, I've been told that when you start walking, if you want to know what your son is going to become or daughter is going to become, put a bottle of whiskey on the table and put a Bible and put some money on the table and see when he walks over what he takes. If he takes the bottle of whiskey, he's possibly going to become a hedonist or a man of the world or whatever. If he takes the money, he could become a business person. If he takes the Bible, he could well become a preacher. So he set it on the table and watched his son walk over. And he saw the son lean over, took the money, put it in his pocket, took the whiskey, put it under one arm, took the Bible and started to walk away. And the father said, good grief, he's going to become a politician. All three in one. And I've not got it in for them because my own profession is often laced the same way. What ministers can look like, what ministers can do. And so this is not to mock. But I've found out one thing, that those in politics who stay the course with a high character are so rare and absolutely indispensable to the ongoing flow of the leadership of nations. This man in Angola prison, Burl Cain, we've had lunch with him. Two politicians came to attend the closing meeting that I was speaking at. I won't even name what parties they were representing. But as we were walking away, we were driving in the same car together, and one of them, who was a prominent senator in the state, looked at me and he said, we love this guy. The reason we've got him here is because he saved a hellish place in our city in what he has done here in this prison. And these two men, one was the mayor, one was a senator, men of God, battling it out in a tough arena. Some time back, I was speaking at one of the opening sessions of the Senate in one state, and the senator who hosted us took us out for lunch afterwards. Corinne was with me at that time. We went and had lunch together, and he wrote me a beautiful letter after that, and I sent it to my entire board for them to read it. And in that, he pours his heart out, how frustrating it gets, how lonely it gets, how discouraging it gets, but they are there in a place because they need to be a light in a dark world. I remember one member of parliament in Ottawa, after I'd addressed their breakfast, taking us out afterwards and talking to Margie and me. He says, you'll never know how many times I wanted to walk away from this position. It's very hard and very lonely. He said, but I'm only here because I'm called in my nation to serve God here, and I will continue to remain here. One of our previous presidents, when I was alone with him before I went to speak at the prayer breakfast, he just said to me in that room how dreadfully lonely life had become for him. Dreadfully lonely. When you're lacerated from every direction, attacked from every direction, and if your conscience is calling you in a certain direction, right or wrong, you make the blunder, and you do the right thing. The fact of the matter is somebody will always want to take you to task. Leadership is critical, but I want to point out something for you that is indispensable in leadership. In India, there's a very well-known film actor. His name is Shah Rukh Khan. They call him SRK. He's one of these good-looking guys, and every actress's dream is to be co-starring with Shah Rukh Khan. He's the big name there. They're the Bollywood icons. I remember one young actress I met, and she was very happy to tell me that she was about to be starring in a movie opposite Shah Rukh Khan. Didn't matter one whit to me, but it meant the world to her. Shah Rukh Khan's fame has started to plummet, and he's behaving in an unseemly way in the public eye. And only an Indian journalist could have written an article like this. Listen to what he says. Shah Rukh Khan and the case of the imploding star, and the journalist is called Avirukh Sen. And he says this, out there in the cosmos, stars that shine much brighter than the sun die spectacular deaths that are caused by the heavy hearts. Their core possesses such a great mass that gravity fuses gases into increasingly weightier elements: sulfur, magnesium, silicon, and finally iron. Iron at the core of a star means death for a star, because the energy consumed in fusing the elements into iron is greater than the energy released during the fusion process. With no energy radiating outwards, the gravity of iron at its center results in the rest of the star collapsing upon itself at tremendous velocity. As one website puts it in astronomy, the star starts consuming itself from the inside out. And the journalist says this: are these the kinds of cosmic forces that are causing the implosion of Bollywood superstar Shah Rukh Khan? Ego, iron at the center, the heavy sense of who you really think you are. It is only the humble that God has promised to exalt, and the wisdom that comes from above is the wisdom that God wants us to have. Humility, the place of history, fluctuation, the place of the leader, politicization, the place of the prophet, which is proclamation. That's what we are called to do. And I want to point out three things to you very quickly before I move to the final thought here. There is a cost in preparing, and the cost goes way beyond ourselves. I often wonder, even when my mother didn't know Christ, how much time she actually spent on her knees asking God to intervene in my life. I think of Hannah going to the temple and using the words, God, remember me, remember me. You go through the Bible and look at the remember me's, and you'll find how crucial they are. Samson, when he'd walked away from God, walks into the public and says, Lord, remember me. The thief on the cross about to die, Lord, remember me. And here's Hannah saying, please remember me. And God blessed her with that son, Samuel. Hannah was behind it. Susanna Wesley was behind John Wesley. History tells us little. Eternity will tell us wherein lay the real powers before the anointing and the calling of people whose names we will never know, who prayed and who called upon God and who coveted God's work on an individual's life. I want to talk to you three things very quickly on the calling of a prophet. Number one is the cost. The cost. When I look at some of my younger colleagues, sometimes I really feel like shedding a tear for them. Because I say to myself, do they really know what all could lie ahead? It's great when you start out, and it's wonderful. I was going through some of my old sermon books, putting some sermon books together, because Margie and I are moving from our home to another place now, to a condominium. And in my old sermon book, I found this. And I remembered wanting to read it once, but I never read it. I don't believe I've ever read it in public. And at my desk downstairs, I read it and I cried. Here's what it says from a great itinerant. Since I've been a bit of a traveling man, my heart goes out to the drummer clan. For I've learned a lot which I didn't know in my younger days as I watched them go. When I envied them and their chances to ride over the country, far and wide. But I've lost the lure of a leather grip, and I live in the dread of another trip. And I've shaped my life to a different plan, for I haven't the faith of a traveling man. I haven't that faith which can keep me strong when I'm outward bound and the miles are long. I can laugh and jest till the day is through, but I can't keep up on a letter or two. And I long for the sight of a tousled head and a healthy boy on his little bed. In spite of the news which their mother writes, I haven't the faith for the lonely nights. I frequently doubt what the letters tell, and I long to see them, to know they're well. But a traveling man must travel along, whether matters at home are right or wrong. He cannot go to their rooms at night and see for himself that they're all right. He must live by faith at the long day's close. He must think them well, but he never knows. He must cure himself when his thoughts grow black, and that is the sort of the faith I lack. Don't worry, we're well, she may write to me, but I've got to be with them where I can see.
The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy and the New Zacharias Institute. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
There's only one line I didn't like in there. But a traveling man must travel along when the matters at home are right or wrong. I don't like that, because when they're wrong, you know you have to be there. My concern is even when they're right, you need to be there. You need to be there at times, even when they're right. And the cost of a call is huge. Huge. When I minister to our troops overseas, I've had big, powerful-bodied men sob on my shoulders. They're defending the nation. We're defending the truth for Christ's sake. I'll move on. Cost of it. The expression of it. You can't have duplicity. You can't have distortion. You can't have deception. You cannot preach yourself. That's Paul, 2 Corinthians 4. And I'll move on. And you have to see the unseen and the chariots of fire that God is going to provide for you wherever you go. I was talking to a couple of friends here, watching the flames over New York. I don't know how many of you received David Wilkerson's devotion when he was alive. If you remember a year or two ago, before he died, he said he had a vision of flames over New York and devastation. I want to get a hold of it again and reread it. The power of the elements that ravaged that great towering city. And as I saw that, I thought to myself, you know, if these are hints of what God can do just through the elements, how much, and I'm not talking about judgment or blessing, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying these are hints of what can be done just with the elements and all our technology coming into shambles. We really think we're big stuff? Really think we can do it all? All of a sudden the city's in darkness. And as I look at it and understand how powerful these onslaughting things are, I just say to you, we need the prophets who see the unseen, who garrison the powers and the forces of God and bring us to the place of His choosing. And the place that God wants you and me to see the unseen is when we are on our knees. You know, Danny Khoury is here at our table. Danny has just flown in from Damascus here. If you want to hear what's happening there, your heart will break. His wife hasn't come. She's in the thick of it in Homs. Thick of it. All the ravages that are going on. But then, it's not just bad news, it's good news. I want to share something with you I don't know if I've shared in public except to my team. I hope this will bless your heart, and I'll move on to my final thoughts. I've suffered with this back for 27 years. You could never catch me without me thinking of my back. You get up in the morning, you go to bed, you walk, you get up from a chair, it's your back. My two SI joints have been locked for nearly 27 years. I remember 3 years ago speaking for Jim Cymbala, and that morning I just tried to bend my foot like that, I forget what it was, to tie a shoelace or what, and I couldn't walk after that. I somehow preached. Jim remembers I was in total pain. John Jarogi and Margie had to literally usher onto the pain because I didn't have the ability to even bend like this and tie my shoelace. 27 years of this stuff. June of this year, one of our board members by the name of Dueng Seng, well known to my brother Wee Chung Hao. Dueng Seng's on our board in Singapore. He used to be the head of Gillette Asia Pacific. Du phoned me on a morning, and it's a Monday morning, and he says, Ravi, I need to see you. I'm in Atlanta. I said, Du, I'm leaving tomorrow. He said, I really need to see you. Can we have breakfast? I said, I'm flying out for 5 weeks. He said, I really need to see you. I said, the only thing I can do is breakfast. I said, oh, I thought it was some bad news. He was going to bring us something. So I drove hurriedly, 8 o'clock in the morning, and he sits down. He's a mild-mannered man. He looks at me and he says, every morning before I get out of bed, I ask God to speak to me. Before I say anything to God, I just say, I'm yours. For 30 minutes, I lie in bed with my eyes open, asking God to speak to me. He said, yesterday God spoke to me about you. I said, really? He said, yes. I was nervous of asking what he said. True. And he said to me, God told me two things. He told me, number one, that the anointing on your life in the years ahead is going to be greater than it has ever been up to this point. I said, do you, God really told you that? He said, yes, my brother, he told me that. I said, then the second thing he told me is, just tell Ravi 3, 4, 5, I'll take care of him. He said, I don't know what that means, Lord. He said, you tell Ravi, he'll know what it means. I said, that's what the Lord told you, 3, 4, 5. He said, yes, 3, 4, 5. I said, the pain in my existence is L3-4 and L4-5 in my lower spine. That's braced with 2 titanium rods and 8 screws bolting me in. First, after his first message to me, I started crying. Now, after my message to him, he started crying. He reached out. There we were sitting at the Flying Biscuit, having he put his hand on my back, and he prayed for me. I went back and I told Margie, I said, I want to tell you what just happened. I said, but I don't know if I should tell anybody else. Just tell you what happened. Because I've gone forward at altars. I've been anointed with oil. I've had all this done naturally. And I said, he's prayed for me. 2 days later, I was flying and I noticed I was about to check my bags in, and I took my shoes off and I went like this just to untie my shoes. I said, what on earth have I just done? Do you know, those 2 SI joints have been released after 27 years of being locked. It is absolutely unbelievable. I have to be cautious, I have to be wise. Sometimes I just want to do a Chariots of fire and run, and I'm cautious and stayed back. And I said, Lord, you took a man in bed, he wakes up, and you tell him that I'm not going to have to worry about L3-4, L4-5. I live day by day, and all I can tell you is from that day in June till now, I have complete freedom in my SI joints, and I'm just enjoying that. When some of you ask me on the back, on the road, yeah, how's your back doing? I've forgotten about it. I take care of it in terms of guarding and so on. What I want to say is this to you. We have God revealing his secrets to his servants, the prophets, and he reveals things like the chariots of fire around that guard you and me. No matter what happens in the future for your life and for mine, I am absolutely convinced that this God of glory is watching over my life. I wrote to Dew, I said, Dew, I just want to say to you one thing. If the indication of the back is an indication of the anointing, I can hardly wait. And Margie will tell you, I have never sensed that rich anointing over my life as I have in the last 3 to 4 months. I've walked away from every session sensing this battle is yours. These chariots are yours. You are accomplishing what you want to accomplish in the midst of your people. So you've got the place of history. Fourthly and quickly, the place of the miracle, affirmation, history, fluctuation, leadership, politicization, prophetic voice, proclamation, place of the miracle, affirmation. I have so much to tell you here, but this is a sermon all in itself, the place of the miracle. But I won't go into details. I've got 2 pages of scientific facts here that I want to give to you. I'll leave it all out for now. Maybe it'll be a talk for Wheaton or something when I'm with you, Stuart. But I want to conclude with that, in the miracle section, with just this. When you look at the 4 laws of nature as they talk about it, you've got the law of gravity, you've got electromagnetism, you've got the strong and the weak nuclear forces, and you take those and multiply them into all of the contingencies that need to be exact and precise, of such extraordinary magnitude that scientists themselves will tell you, those who think water into wine is tough, this is 10 times tougher. They believe in a miracle. Listen, for example, to what it is that Sir Frederick Hoyle talked about in protein formation. He says this: it is an outrageously small possibility. He goes on to say that he calculated the odds that all the functional proteins necessary for life might form in one place by random events. And he and Chandra Wickramasinghe, who is a professor of mathematics from Cardiff in Wales, Professor Hoyle at that time in Cambridge of astronomy, they calculated the odds of this happening in a random setting is greater than 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power. That means 1 followed by 40,000 zeros. And then he goes on to say this: since there are only 10 to the 80th power atoms in the entire universe, here's what Frederick Hoyle says: it is an outrageously small probability that simply cannot be faced, even if the whole universe at its beginning consisted of merely organic soup. Then he goes on to say this, and I quote: life could not have originated here on Earth. Do you hear what he's saying? It could not have originated here on Earth. Nor does it look as though biological evolution can be explained from within an earthbound theory of life. Genes from outside the Earth are needed to drive the evolutionary process. This much can be consolidated by strictly scientific means, by experiment, by observation and calculation. What is he saying? The panspermia theory. Seeds had to be brought from another planet in order to make it possible for Earth to breed life. That's what he went with. That's what he went with. And then you listen to this comment here, Stephen Hawking. Why did the universe start out with so nearly the critical rate of expansion that separates models that recollapse from those that go on expanding forever? So that even now, 10,000 million years later, that's US 10 billion, it is still expanding nearly at the precise critical rate. If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 1,000 million, that's a US quintillion, by the way. If it had changed 1 second after the Big Bang by even a smaller part than 1 in a quintillion, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached the present state. And then he makes this comment: even if there is only one possible unified theory, it is just a set of rules and equations. That's all it is. My question, says he, what is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for us to describe? The usual approach of science of constructing a mathematical model cannot answer these questions of why there should be a universe for the model that we have to describe, and why the universe goes to all the bother of existing. So Francis Crick comes in and says this: an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many other conditions which would have to have been so strictly followed. I want to lead you to this application and then close my final thought here. And it is this: a miracle. I believe that the average naturalist doesn't go with the miracle because he doesn't like where it's going to lead him. If they would observe the simple sublimity of life. You know, I've become a grandfather in the last year. And you take a tiny little baby in your arms and you actually see them very differently to, even in a way you saw your own children. And I have a theory on that. But you see this tiny little one and you watch the crawling start, the attempt to walk, the laughter, the smile, the tears, the names, the reaching out of the arms. And you know, when you're married as long as I